And the truth is as a collective, we are disconnected. Humanity is disconnected. We are walking around asleep.
This is Becoming, the podcast for leaders to think differently with actionable tips in 30 minutes or less to claim your intuition, your influence, and your agency. And finally get to the truth of what stands between you and who you are meant to become. Many of us believe that once we become that future self, then we will be happy, successful, and complete. This podcast exists to shine a light on the truth that the time is now and your future self can be who you become today.
Hello, podcast listeners. Welcome back to episode 9 of Becoming. If you have been with me for the prior 8 episodes, this episode is going to serve as the how to implement what we've gone over the last 8 episodes. Now, if you didn't catch the last 8 episodes, I highly recommend stop this recording right now and go and listen to those episodes. I am telling you, you will be so glad that you did. You will get so much from going episode 1 through 8 and then following up with this episode. So stop, pause, go back to those episodes and listen. If this is your first time, check it out, but even feel free to go back and listen again. The more that you listen back to those episodes, the deeper and deeper the teaching integrates. So don't be afraid to dive in that capacity either. So the past 8 episodes, we really dove into these addictions. And like I said, today's episode is the bridge, going from awareness of what is going on to actually making change. We first have to see where we are, right? It's no different than if we are activating the GPS and we're driving from LA to New York. We have to know where we're starting to be able to get to where we're going. And this is no different. And so we have to know where we're starting. And the truth is as a collective, we are disconnected. Humanity is disconnected. We are walking around asleep. And the past 8 episodes, the goal of those episodes is to shine a light and wake you up to the truth, to some level of the truth in your own life so that you can start down this path, this journey. One of the biggest questions that I get when I'm working with clients is once they become aware of something is, okay, Stacy, what do I do next? And that is really what today's episode is about. After I dive into that with you, I'm going to reveal a little bit more about what the future of Becoming holds and my plans for the podcast, because it's really important to me that as we begin this journey together, as we link arms together, that you get in my head on things, right? You get behind, or as I like to say, you get into the method to my magic. You get insight into why I do the things that I do. And I want to share the different facets of becoming so that you know what to expect as we go forward. So let's dive in. So we've talked about these addictions. And as I said, we did a deep dive over the past 8 episodes. And to really bring what we talked about into implementation and integration, there's 3 principles that you need to know. As you listen to the Addictions to Awakenings and you really listen and how they apply to your own life, there's 3 things that you need to know to make change in your life after you hear the information. So the first one is connection. There's 2 facets to connection. Number 1 is we need to first connect to the fact that this is playing out in our own lives. We need to connect to the fact that we are disconnected. It's only by first seeing that we're disconnected internally that we can form true connection with ourselves and with others. And so as you dive into these different addictions, the first thing that you need to be aware of is connection. How does this connect to my life? How does this connect to the challenges that I have? How does this connect to the areas where I win in my life? Because a lot of times, the addictions, as I've described them in the last 8 episodes, those actually can serve us in a positive way for many years in our lives. It's not always negative that they show up. The fact remains that we are run by these things. And so the idea is, if there is something that you're being run by, and I'll just give an example. Like, let's say that you have a pattern of overachievement to prove you're enough, or a pattern of overachievement to prove something. It doesn't have to be that you're enough. That pattern is technically serving you well, right? You could argue, well, Stacy, that pattern is serving me well. It's made me millions and millions of dollars. Yes, it is serving you well, but the problem is that it's running you well. And what we want to do is we want to take your power back and switch the paradigm so that if you want to overachieve to achieve a goal that you have, that's your choice versus a pattern running you unconsciously. And you're going through your entire life trying to prove all the time and never fulfilled in the process, because all you are doing is proving, hoping someone notices. And at the end of the day, you become empty because you lack fulfillment. So that's the idea. When I talk about connecting, first seeing that this is playing out internally, also making connection a priority internally. You must first see that we're disconnected by way of seeing these addictions, by way of seeing how they unconsciously run us, so that you can form connection. Once you form connection within you and prioritize your internal state as your source of fuel for creating the life on purpose that you desire, that's when things start to get really cool. That's when things start to get really fun. When you prioritize connection with yourself above that old pattern of proving, you have nothing to prove, and you're doing it for the joy of it. And you start to go more with the flow of life. You start this beautiful dance with life because you're not in resistance anymore. You're not coming from this disconnected internal state anymore. You're coming from connection and wanting to create and achieve and dance in life, and looking at it more as your creations versus something for someone else. If we are trying to prove, we are doing it for someone else, something else. So that's an example of connection. The next step is ownership. So once you connect to the fact that you have a pattern running you, or once you connect that you live your entire life in validation, trying to get other people to validate you, you must take ownership. And that can look different for you than it does for me, for others than it does for you. But I'm talking more generally of how do we implement change with these teachings. You first must take ownership that you are participating in this dynamic. You have to take ownership that you are creating your life. You are leading your life, right? When I talk about leadership on this podcast, I'm not always talking about business leadership. I'm talking about you are the leader of your own life. You are leading your own ship. You are owning the ship. And on some level, you have to start showing up with that tenacity to life if you want to achieve what you want to achieve. And so as you see the truth that, let's say, you do seek validation and you make a lot of decisions to get validation, you have to own that. And once you own that and decide to change, that takes us into the third principle, which is decision. So let's walk through this. You first have to connect to the fact that you are seeking validation constantly. You then have to take ownership. And what that looks like is being honest to yourself about it. It's about saying, you know what? I have been seeking validation and prioritizing that before my own thoughts of self, before my own, perspective before my own opinion of myself. It's been more important for me to get validation and please as a form of safety or worthiness than it is to just be good with me. So, first, you connect and see that truth. Then you take ownership. And then the third principle is to make a decision. And that decision is I am going to self validate. Wow. What does that even mean? What does it mean when we've been validating through others our entire lives? What does it even mean or sound like for me to approve of me? And this is where this is a journey. It's not a destination. You need to then go through the process. And of course, you can reach out to us and we can help you. But you need to start the process of what does self-approval even look like for me? If I were alone doing this project in this career and there wasn't anyone else, what does self-approval look like? What does it look like to be comfortable with myself? What does it look like to come home to me? What does it feel like to belong to me and me alone? Right? This process of decision isn't just a one-time thing. It's an everyday exercise. And so as you explore the 8 addictions in the last 8 episodes, these 3 principles are an amazing foundation for you to start implementing them and really coming back to these 3 principles of connection, ownership, and decision. And frankly, if you start to operate in your own life based on these 3 principles alone, not even applying them to Addiction to Awakening on the Becoming podcast, you're going to see profound shifts. Because here's really what I'm saying to you. I'm saying if you prioritize connection, you're going to be connected internally, which means you're connected externally, which means you're living a conscious, intentional life. If you take ownership and not just take responsibility, but ownership of everything in your life and realize that you are the creator. Wow. How much power is that? And then knowing that your decision is where the buck stops. So if you can start operating in connection, ownership, and knowing that your decision comes first, you will be supported in everything you pursue and start to create more consciously by implementing these 3 things alone.
Are you ready to step into your power as a conscious leader? Are you seeking a community of extraordinary, like-minded women who are making a difference in their internal and external world? Well, look no further. We'd love to introduce to you Legendary Leaders Advisory, a premier women-led and women-owned leadership community that's focused on success, not just externally, but in the internal world as well. We are the first and only leadership community that contributes a portion of its membership fees to fund and inspire the next generation of leaders through both scholarship and mentorship opportunities. And the best part, it's led by its own members. If you're looking for a community with a different conversation that addresses the necessary connection between internal and external results, look no further. Click the link in the show notes to learn more about Legendary Leaders Advisory, and one of our Truth Teacher consultants will reach out to you to discuss the opportunity further.
So now that we have landed the plane, I love that phrase, on the last 8 episodes, I wanted to take a moment, like I said, and just dive into the Becoming podcast and share with you a little bit more about my method to my magic in regards to what we're going to be covering on the podcast. So there's really 2 facets to becoming that I want you to understand. The first is that we all have a journey of becoming. We all have a journey of how we got from here to there. And the focus of this podcast as it relates to this topic is we're going to talk a lot about the how, right? We're really going to talk about how did this person become a conscious leader? How do we lead consciously? How do we feel worthy, thus become wealthy? How are those things related? So there's going to be one facet of this podcast that's dedicated to the how, the what, right? Themed episodes, guest experts that are specifically chosen to really dive deep into being able to communicate the how and the what. But the other part of the podcast, and what I think is really more important, is how do we return home to ourselves, right? In this process of becoming, we each have left a part of ourselves behind as we've become different versions of ourselves, whether you're in the process of, becoming a mom or becoming a CEO, becoming an entrepreneur. There's different seasons of life that require different aspects of you. The problem is that we unknowingly make decisions along the way where we leave parts of ourselves inappropriately behind. And it can be small or large as far as how serious this can be. Sometimes, I know this was true for me, I built my whole career and didn't realize I was in one of the main addictions of proving and validating, right? Those two addictions, so much so that I didn't even know what I wanted. I was so focused on my career and building that I didn't even know what made me happy because I was so into that project at the time. And what I left behind was the softness, the innocent part of who Stacy is in the pursuit of this hard driving, career focused, driven woman. And let's be clear, those are different aspects of me, right? The funny, soft, charismatic part of me is very much why I was so successful, right? But it's this idea of I had to leave part of me behind. And so the other part of this podcast is really the truth about becoming, that in the process of becoming, the lie of limitation, the lie that we can subscribe to is that we have to become something different than we are to be successful, or we have to become something different to realize our dreams. And that's simply not the case. And what can happen is we can spend so much of our lives becoming something only to arrive there and realize that that's not even what we want. It's kind of like the quote, so many spend their health gaining wealth and then have to spend their wealth to regain their health. I'm going to read that again. So many spend their health gaining wealth and then have to spend their wealth to regain their health. So many of us spend our life becoming what we think we should. What if instead we spent our life claiming what we are, who we are? What if we instead directed the focus from external to internal and really focused on our internal state, deeply connecting to our goals, desires, our heart's wishes, and from that connected place, built the life that we dreamed of? So that's the other part of this podcast that is really, again, what I think is the most important piece of what we're going to focus on is how do we come home to ourselves now instead of losing ourselves in the process of becoming. And remember that you already are everything that's a match to what you want. You already are and are equipped to everything that you want to create. Yes, you may need to, be a part of different masterminds and grow your expertise in different ways. But there is a huge distinction between learning and growing and thinking you need to become intrinsically different than what you are and who you are to be successful. There's a big change in mindset and beliefs that I'm talking about there. So as we dive into the different shows and go into both solo episodes and our amazing guests joining us as we go down this journey together, there's really three things that I want this podcast to do for you. It is the mission behind why we launched this podcast. So, number one is that you realize that anything you want to become is already within you. Whether you are launching a new product, service, or line in your current business, or you're wanting to start a side hustle, or you're ready to quit that corporate job, wherever you are, whatever you want to become is already within you. Number two, it's my goal that by our hosts and our guests and our conversation on this podcast, that you see and observe that the only difference between those that desire and those that become is a decision. And number three, what stands in the way of you becoming all you are meant to be is largely what disconnects you. So if we can really dive into how you're disconnected, why you're disconnected, and come into a connected internal state, that's going to be our fuel so that anything is possible. So as we wrap up this episode today, I want to leave you with a reminder. The three principles to integrate transformation, the three principles to take into your day-to-day life to become the next level of you can start today. And those principles are connection, ownership, and the power of decision. I want to talk about decision a little bit more because I think that, there is a belief out there. Our default belief as humans is that we believe when we see. When we have evidence of something, whether it's, science-backed or data-backed, we feel so much more safe in the decision when we can see the evidence first, right? And what I have learned in my life and what I want my life to be a walking testimony of is that your decisions come first. In other words, if you believe and make a decision, you will be supported in ways that will blow your mind. I have stories upon stories, situations after situations where I have taken the step and not known how it was going to unfold, but I believed, I trusted. And I think that we really have it backwards, as humans, in that we have to see first and then believe. That's not how it works. And plus, if that was how it works, it would be so boring, right? Because we would know everything. There would be no adventure. There would be no surprise, right? And so it's like, if you can start to look at these three pillars, these three principles of connection, taking ownership, and making these decisions, you're going to be unstoppable. You already are, right? It's just this coming back to these basics in a way of what really supports change in our life. And I've boiled it down to these three things. But I think that decision is such an important one because we have it backwards. We were taught backwards. We were taught not necessarily to believe first and then decide. But if you can decide with belief, it truly is a game changer and magic can flow into your life. If we have to see and then believe, we're really in resistance because that's not how the universe works. And when we can start harnessing the power of decision, things start to change because we constantly are saying, I'm taking ownership because I'm a connected being and my decisions take off. My decisions are supported and nothing can stop me. That's really what you're saying when you concoct these three principles I'm giving you today. When I am a connected individual and I take radical ownership, my decisions are supported. There is nothing you can't do. So go forth in connection Go forth in taking ownership and claim your decisions. There's probably decisions right now that you're thinking of, that you're muddling on. Make them. And I promise you, may my life be that evidence that you will be delighted, surprised, and life will make more sense and you'll have more clarity when you decide. It's truly such a superpower that you have to be connected, to take ownership, and make those decisions you know you're ready to make. I'll see you next week.
Are you experiencing change and breakthroughs as you listen to Becoming? If so, show us some love and hit the subscribe button, leave a review, and share an episode. I love bringing this content to you each week, and together, listener by listener, we can wake up the world. See you next week.